Hey, but parents, thank you so much for being here. If I haven't met you, my name is TJ Brooks. I'm the Elevate Junior High pastor. I promise this doesn't happen all the time. But thank you for being here. We appreciate it. I know your student might say, God, I wanted to come by myself. Why are you here? But you know what? I'm glad you're here. So thank you for being here. But hey, tonight we're going to jump into a one-week series, and it's called this. It's called What Next, right? And the idea of this is we're talking about in the world that we live in and everything that's going on. We've talked about COVID a bunch. We've talked about all these different things. But it's this idea of when Jesus calls, what's next? And as you know, Jesus calls us all the time to many, many, many different things and to incredible things in our life. But I want you guys to start asking what's next. And not in a sense of like, oh, great, like what's next? But what if we started asking the question of what next? Meaning like, what next can I do? What else can Jesus use me to do, right? But I'll start this way. If you have ever been on a trip with me, okay, many of you are going to go to Whitewater with me. Here's the problem. If you ask my wife, she'll tell you this is the constant issue. I am the worst person you've ever met with directions. Okay, like it's bad, and I'm not just saying that like just because like oh sometimes I miss. No, like so I grew up in Arizona in a small town, and to this day I still can't tell you more than 5 streets in the town I grew up in. I grew up there for like 18 years, okay? I still can't tell you where certain streets are. Even now, so I live over off of Twin Oaks, right by the golf course. Not on the golf course. We don't have that money. But by the golf course over off Twin Oaks, and again, I think it's Woodward, I think. Thank you, okay? For 6 months, no joke, I had to use my GPS in my phone every single day to get from my house to here. For 6 months. And even now, here's what I'll tell you. I know like how to get here, but every day, like when I leave, my wife's like, hey, where are you? I'm like, oh, I'm on my way home. She's like, no, what street are you on? I'm like, I have no idea. One of them on my way is called El Norte. I don't know where it starts or stops, but it's one of them. I know that I go by Richland Elementary, so whatever street that is, and then I take a right, and then it goes up the hill, and then I pass the graveyard. These are the directions in which I live by, okay? And here's the thing, is I now know how to get there, but let me tell you this too. There have been, in the past 30 days, at least 3 times where I've taken a wrong turn, okay? I've now been here for like 2.5 years. We haven't moved. I know how to get here, but at least 3 times in the past 30 days, have taken a wrong turn. And it's not that like I don't have like every intention of getting here or like getting even home. It's just like my wife will tell you like I'm a very distracted driver. It's not that I'm distracted. It's that I'm not thinking is what she would tell you. Okay, I'm not always thinking. I'm just kind of driving. I'm just going with the flow. But here's the thing. I started thinking about this, and I was like, okay, you might have every intention of doing something right, but maybe you don't have the perfect way of doing it, or maybe you don't succeed in it, or maybe it just kind of isn't right. So think about this. It doesn't matter how well you run in a direction if you're running in the wrong direction, right? So I got some notes that are going to pop up here, and so if you've got your Bible, if you've got your note sheet, write these things down. But here's this idea. It doesn't matter how well you run if you're going in the wrong direction. Right? So imagine if you say, hey, I'm going to go do this. Anybody ever wanted to run a marathon? Has anybody ever ran a marathon? Okay, all right. I'm going to put my hand down because I have not, nor do I want to, okay? But if you have ever done that, imagine ready? Okay, so you're running a marathon or you're running away from something. Sure, let's go with that. I think maybe that could happen. You're running away from something, and all of a sudden, you get to like a fork in the road, and you're whatever you're running from, which that's a bad example, or your marathon, you're in the lead. All of a sudden, you get to a fork in the road, and you have to decide right or left. One of them's right, one of them's wrong. You might be running really fast, really, really well, but what if you go in the wrong direction? Then what can happen is it kind of doesn't matter how well you were doing, right? It doesn't really matter, like, I'm really pushing forward. If it's a marathon, I'm ahead of everybody. But all of a sudden, if you start running in the wrong direction, it doesn't really matter how well you're running because you're going to go off track. You're going to get away from what you were meant to be doing. You're going to get away from what your goal was and how you were supposed to be accomplishing it, right? And what's crazy is in this season, as we've talked so many times, Elevate, about COVID, about this year, about every just thing that's been going on is this is a really, really good time to recalibrate, to know what direction we're supposed to be running, to know how we're supposed to get there, how fast we're supposed to go, right? This is a great time to recalibrate and restart. Because as we look around the world, there's so many things that are going on. And I think more than anything, what we really want to see happen this year is a movement of God in our community, in our schools, with our friends, on our sports team, all around us. I think if we really look at this world, after everything that's been going on this year, everything that's still going on in our country, in our world, and all around us in our culture, I think if we all sat down and said, hey, what's the one thing we wish would happen this year? Now, for some of you, it's you wish cheeseburgers would fall from the sky, which I'm in that boat. For some of you, it's I wish I could go on like a crazy shopping spree to get whatever I wanted. Like, I know we all wish things. But if we all came together as Christians, as believers, and we all said, hey, there's one thing we want to have happen this year, it's that we would want to see a movement in our community and our culture where God shows up in people's lives and they know it. And they become believers. They come to church with us. They begin to move in the same direction as us. So that way, as we're running a race, as we're running in a direction, there would be people with us doing it. Can we all agree on that? Like if there's one thing that happens, I think we all hope that people would come to know Jesus this year, right? Am I the only one? Okay, cool. That's all right. I'm going to just share what I'm thinking. But that's what I hope. I hope that is one of the things that happens this year, that people come to know Jesus in maybe a different way than they've ever thought. Maybe people would come to know Jesus in a way that is maybe something they never thought was possible. You know, for so many people, I think for some of us, we want, for those paralyzed by fear, that they meet the God of the Bible who is the Prince of Peace. I think for some of us, we have friends out there who are scared of God, who think I've done so many things wrong that if I ever even thought about going to church or if I ever thought about God or whatever, I'm terrified. But yet, for those of us who come to Elevate and come to church and read our Bible daily, and we know who God is, we know, as we just talked about the last few weeks, He is the Prince of Peace. You don't need to be paralyzed with fear. He is an incredible God who loves you. But what if people could actually know that and understand it? For those racked by loneliness, they meet their Heavenly Father who has adopted them into their forever family, into a heavenly family. I think for some of us in this room, loneliness is a real thing. I think if that's not you, you can think of somebody in your life who struggles with loneliness and feels left out and feels abandoned and feels like I'm on my own. And what if they could come to know a God this year that they would realize that they're not alone? That there is a God who loves them and has brought them into His family, into His eternity with Him, because He loves them and cares for them and is with them at all times. What if what's next for that person is that loneliness goes away because they understand that there is that type of God for them? What if that was next for them? For some of us with a past, you hear about God's grace that's greater than all of our sin. Again, that's probably every one of us in this room. We've either gone through seasons, maybe you're in one, maybe you're about to be in one, where you think of the past that you've had, the things you've done. I know for some of you this is getting weird, right? You're sitting next to your parent, and maybe you think the things I've said to my parent, how could God ever trust me? How could God ever care for me the way that I treat people, have treated people, the things that I've done, the choices I've made that nobody around me even knows about? There's no way that God would ever forgive me for that. But what if the people that struggle with that, struggle with having a dark past, a difficult past, something that they regret, what if they could come to know a God that has grace beyond measure? What if that was next for our community? What if, and I keep saying for our community and culture, but what if that was next for you too? I know for a lot of us, we come here to church and we say all the right things, right? We show up, we go, yeah, we're going to praise Jesus, we're going to sing. And there's the words up there, and then, we hear a message, we read our Bible, whatever, but you don't actually believe it. But what if what was next for you was that you understood those things? What if that was next for you? What if we began to believe those things ourselves? So what was next for us was to go out into the world and make a movement. My question for you right now to think about as we dive into this is, how can we see a movement of God in our lives? How can we? For so many of us, we get stuck in our past. For so many of us, we get stuck with feeling like God is scary and God is just a big bully with a magnifying glass who just wants to pick on you and make your life miserable. For some of you, you struggle with loneliness and feel like you have nobody else. But what if what was next for you and the people around us in our community and our culture was that wasn't the case, that wasn't what we believed and what lived in our heart? What if what was next is we began to see a movement starting right here in our Elevate family, but it moved out into our friends and our culture where we got to help them understand that, no, there is an incredible God that I believe in. I don't just show up at church on Tuesday night and on Sunday mornings and I just say those things and I sing and dance and worship, but I actually don't know what the words even are. I just know that when This Is Living goes off, I just get crazy, right? Like, what if you actually believed these things? I truly believe that that's how we'll begin to see a movement and a change in culture and what's going on all around us. You guys with me on that? Okay, so here's what I want you guys to do. I want you guys to open up your Bibles to John chapter 2. And here's what we're going to do tonight, okay? We're going to dive into that idea of what's next, okay? If you don't have a Bible, like we say every single week, we would love to give you one. Talk to your small group leader about it. We've got Bibles to give to you when you need one. Open up to John chapter 2. And we're going to dive into a story with Jesus where we see a big kind of mistake happen and how Jesus fixes it, how he recovers, how he uses people that I think all of us are going to be able to relate to, right? And so here's as we dive into this is taking place at a wedding, okay? Some of you have heard the story, some of you haven't, that's okay. Jesus shows up to a wedding. Now, here's what you know about weddings, and if you don't know, I'm going to tell you. Weddings are supposed to be the perfect day. Am I right? They're supposed to be glamorous with like cake and ice cream and other desserts and like your friends and family and dancing, even if you're like me and you don't know how to dance. Y'all have seen me at silent disco. Like, it's bad. But here's the deal. At weddings, it's supposed to be amazing. Like, nothing should go wrong, okay? And I know we've all seen there's shows called like Bridezilla and things like that. And the reason those shows exist is because there are people that care very, very much about weddings to make sure they go perfect. But sometimes weddings don't go perfect. And let me tell you, at my wedding, my biggest fear was when I said like the I do's and the vows, I was going to mess it up. Okay? Because that's a promise. And if I said the wrong thing, I'm promising the wrong thing, okay? I got really nervous. Like think about this. Like, it says, like, what did I write down? It says, like, I take you, Andy, my wife, you guys met her, she's amazing. I take you, Andy, they say this, to be your lawfully wedded wife. But what if I had said, Andy, I take you to be my awfully wedded wife? That's a bad start to a marriage, okay? That's a bad start. Or when it says, like, for better or worse, what if I was like, and for better, you're worse? Like, think about it. I don't know. That's a rough start, okay? Luckily, those things didn't happen at my wedding. The worst part was I danced until like midnight, and there's this song called Oh Yeah by Yellow, which is the weirdest song ever, but me and my cousin were just like tribal dancing like this, and like my wife was like, oh, please stop. I didn't marry that guy, but she did, and she stuck with me. But think about that. At weddings, things can happen that are bad, okay? But there's also ways to recover from it. So let's dive in. John chapter 2, verse 1. Here's what it says. I'm reading the NIV version, so we always read. This is the backdrop for Jesus' first miracle. It says this. On the third day, a wedding took place at Cana in Galilee. Jesus' mother was there, and Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. When the wine glass was gone, that's so tough. Jesus' mother said to him, they have no more wine. Okay, so check this out. So at a wedding, okay, especially back then, wine was like what everybody's drinking the whole time, okay? And so you knew that your wedding was like, it was a banger, it was awesome, everybody wanted to be there. If you had, great food, if you had wine, like this was like a social occasion where you had to dress to impress. You had to have the best food, the best entertainment, all these things, because what it was a reflection of your family. Okay, so if your wedding was awful, everybody was like, your marriage is going to be awful. Okay, but if your wedding was amazing and there's dancing and wine, all these things, like your marriage is going to be perfect. Okay? And so what's happening here is all of a sudden they're at this wedding and they run out of wine, okay? Which is, back then, is not good. Like, that's bad. Like, this is your marriage. Oh, no. Like, it's bad. You guys are going to fall apart. This is not good. And so that's why Jesus' mother is like, hey, we're out of wine. Because that's a big deal back then. This, again, social occasion. You invited everybody. The who's who of your town was here. And you had to look good to show off to everybody, which is such a weird concept, but that's what they had to do. Okay, verse 4. Woman, why do you involve me? Jesus replied, my hour has not yet come. His mother said to the servants, do whatever he tells you. Okay, so here's the deal. What's happening right here is she says, hey, servants, listen, do what this guy says. You don't know who he is. He's amazing. His name's Jesus. You'll hear about him someday, okay? And all of a sudden, they look around, and there happen to be these pots, these giant jars around. And so the servants are like, okay, like, whatever you tell us to do, like, we're good. And there's happened to be these pots there, which is pretty cool. Nearby stood 6 stone water jars, the kind used by the Jews for ceremonial washing, okay? So these were not like wine jars. These were like, we're using these for ceremony and like other things. This is not like you don't drink out of this stuff. Ceremonial washing, each holding from 20 to 30 gallons. Jesus said to the servants, fill the jars with water. Now, if all of a sudden you hear at a wedding, back then, the wine is gone, and this guy, who you don't really know who he is, says, hey, fill those with water. I bet you're questioning and going like, hey, like, okay, I get it. Like, we need to hydrate, but we're supposed to get wine. Like, if we show up with water, like, we're servants. Like, we're like down, like, we're going to get beat. Like, are you serious? Water? That's going to make everybody so mad, right? But Jesus like, hey, fill those with water. And again, I think some of you know the stories we're talking about it, some of you don't. I think hindsight 2020, we know Jesus has a plan, but imagine being there. Imagine you're this servant who, maybe it's like your first day on the job, like you just got this wedding gig, and they're like, hey, you got to listen to this guy. He's in a robe, big beard, sandals, you'll see him. And he tells you, instead of wine, fill it with water. Again, you'd probably be like, hey, dude, like, I don't think you get how like catering works, but we're supposed to give them what they ordered, and water is not on the menu right now. But again, hindsight, we know that Jesus has a plan. So they filled them to the brim. Then he told them, now draw some out and take it to the master of the banquet. Okay, hold up. Master of the banquet. This is like the manager of the restaurant, okay? This is the person in charge who's making sure the whole wedding is going great, like is you know, on like the headset, like telling him when the bride's coming, all that stuff. That's this person. And he says, hey, take a glass, take it to the banquet master and let him try. Here you go, boom. And again, they're probably like, dude, they need wine, not water. I mean, do you not get it? Like, is there something missing? Like, why are you telling us to do water? But these servants are kind of stuck in this moment. He says, draw some out and take it to the master of the banquet. And I bet you, again, think about it. If you're a servant sitting there, you have no idea what the plan is here, but you're being told instead of wine, which they wanted, you're going to take water. I bet you're pretty freaked out right now. You're either going to get fired or worse, okay? But again, we know that Jesus has a plan because we read it, but they didn't know this. So here's what it says in verse 9. And the master of the banquet tasted the water that had been turned into wine. He did not realize where it had come from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew. Then he called the bridegroom aside and said, everyone brings out the choice wine first, and then the cheaper wine after the guests have had too much to drink. But you have saved the best till now. What Jesus did here in Cana of Galilee was the first of the signs through which he had revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him. Because all of a sudden, right, these guys, these servants, take this water to the banquet master. He takes a sip and he goes, oh, shoot. And then he says, hey, bring the bridegroom, right? Bring the whole wedding party. Let's check this out. And he goes, listen, we're supposed to bring the good wine first, so then as people drink, and then they don't taste it as much anymore, like we get the cheaper stuff. Like, that's how we do this. But why would you bring me the best wine at the end? Why would you not use this first? Why'd you save it? And it showed right there Jesus' first miracle, right? Again, Jesus could have made like some really bad wine that could have just like got by, or he could have just like said, hey, here's water. You probably need to hydrate. This is better for you. But these servants, these disciples who were with him in this moment saw, okay, we've got nothing. We've got these jars. We're going to put water in it. As it goes over here, now wine comes out of it. There's no trickery. There's no way. Like, we saw it from the beginning to end. And it says, and his disciples believed in him. In this moment, there's a mistake. There's something bad at a wedding, which is supposed to be the greatest day of your life. And I know that wine doesn't sound like a big deal, but in this day and age, this was huge. Now, all of a sudden, the wine is gone. Our wedding is ruined. Our marriage is a sham. Everyone's going to laugh at us. No one's going to trust us. Everyone's going to think that our marriage is going to fall apart. But Jesus does something incredible. Now, from this story, you're probably wondering, well, I don't get what next has to do with it. Well, here's the thing. There's 3 ideas that I want you to take away. So if you've got your notes, get ready to write these things down, okay? This is what I want you to understand from this story. 1, I want you to realize that God wants to use you. And for some of you, you go, yeah, I don't necessarily think that that's true. I don't understand, like, why, what does that story have to do with me? Well, check this out. Jesus used who to make this miracle happen? Jesus used who to be a part of this miracle? Who? Come on, somebody. Servants. He didn't use Justin Bieber. He didn't use Lady Gaga or who else? Katy Perry, okay? We could list famous people. He didn't. Jesus used servants to fulfill this miracle, his first miracle. Think about this. Like, if Jesus is starting his ministry and really getting things going on earth, wouldn't you think he would have used like somebody super famous to like get the word out? Right? Like nowadays, think about it. Like if Jesus comes to do a miracle, he's going to get somebody with like a massive like TikTok following where they do like a 30-second dance in one of these things. And then everyone's like, oh, I know Jesus now, right? But back then, he could have picked somebody kind of famous, maybe like a gladiator or like a Caesar or somebody important. I don't know. Or even like the bride. Like, hey, let me show the bride so she can tell it. No. Jesus used servants. And oftentimes what would happen is God uses the ordinary to show the extraordinary. Right? For many of you, you go, well, I'm just me. I'm just TJ. I'm just whoever. God would never use me. I don't have anything to offer. And what I want to tell you is that I don't believe that that's true. And even if you are going to argue with me and say that I'm ordinary, I have nothing going on, I have nothing to provide, it's just little old me, guess what? That's good enough. That's not even just good enough. That's what God's going to use in you. Jesus regularly used ordinary people to demonstrate the extraordinary. Think about his disciples. Were these guys anybody crazy? No, most of them were fishermen. Like nothing to brag about. Jesus consistently, through his life, used people who were ordinary or messed up just like us to do miracles, to change people's lives. Like, think about this. For some of you, you're like, yeah, I don't believe that. But check this out. On this next slide, he used cowards like Gideon, murderers like Moses, those who couldn't speak, Moses again, drunks, Noah, liars, Jacob, a donkey, there's a donkey, widows, teenagers, the sick. Think about all of this. These are not Justin Bieber and celebrities and TikTok stars and Instagram people with like millions of followers. These are average people. These are ordinary. These are people that messed up. Jesus isn't expecting you to be something that you're not. Jesus isn't expecting you to be the most influential person that's ever walked this earth, because guess what? He was. He took that spot. Jesus is just saying, I want to use you. And what I want you to really, 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 really understand is that Jesus wants to use you. And when I ever hear you guys say, well, it's just me, or I'm just in junior high, you're not. You're exactly who Jesus needs. And that leads me to my next one. Number 2, it's listen to the voice of Jesus. Oftentimes, what happens is, anybody not like quiet time? Anybody just find quiet time? Like, okay, here's what happens with me. We all, we'll say, like, hey, wake up in the morning, be quiet, be still, Jesus will talk to you. But you know what happens to me very often is I'll be sitting there and I'll be reading my Bible, but I'll see like a word that sort of looks like pizza. And then I start thinking about pizza. And then I end up getting my phone and I text Andy and say, hey, are we having pizza for dinner? And she said, no, we're having, I don't know, potatoes and something else. And I'm like, oh, potatoes, that's how you make French fries. And then you see what I'm saying? Like the ball just keeps rolling, okay? Sometimes quiet time for me is one of the most difficult times. But here's what I also know, and here's for a lot of us, when I have these conversations with you guys, you say, well, when I do quiet time, it's really distracting, it's really hard to focus, like I can't do these things. Well, guess what? If you've ever been an athlete, like when I say ever been, it's because there's adults in the room, okay? I myself, I was an athlete at one point. If you've ever been an athlete or tried for sports, very rarely are you ready to go at that sport from day one, right? What does it take? Practice. It takes time. It takes creating a habit and a routine. So what I'd say to you is, when it comes to quiet time, in the stillness, hearing the voice of God, hearing Jesus speak to you in the morning maybe when you're reading your Bible, yes, in the beginning, it can be a little awkward. It can be a little distracting where you start thinking about, I don't even remember what I said. Chicken nuggets, the French fries, to whatever, like pizza. Sorry, I was thinking about other food now. See what I'm saying? But all of a sudden, you start thinking about other things. But what can happen is if you choose daily to make it a habit and to be obedient to diving into the Word in that quiet time, you will develop the ability and the hearing to be able to hear Jesus in those moments. Because yes, in the very beginning, you're going to get very, very distracted. And for me, what happens is if I take a few days off from my time with God, and then all of a sudden I try to jump back into it, I was on vacation, kids were crazy, whatever. Yes, it takes me a little bit to get back into that routine because I get distracted, because that's the human nature in me. But to be able to create a change and a movement and revival in our community, we have to be able to listen to Jesus. And so it's creating a habit routine. Here's the other habit routine I want you to break. And yes, I'm going to say it tonight in front of your parents. If you find yourself listening more often to the influencers on Instagram and TikTok and Pinterest and these different things, who are you actually listening to? Do you have room? Do you have the capacity to listen to God as well? Or are you so focused on what social media says to do and to be a part of and to like and to dive into that you have no more room to listen to somebody else like Jesus? And let me say this too. I'm not just talking to students. I'm talking to myself. I'm talking to other parents. I'm talking to all of us. Where do you listen in life? What is the voice of influence? If it's not Jesus, we've got to fix something and course correct. Far too often I find myself diving too much into social media or different things, and I go, man, in that 15 minutes that I was just scrolling through Instagram, I could have dove into something that brings life into my life, that brings health to my family, that grows my spirituality, all those things. But if we're too caught up in listening to what the world says in social media and Instagram and all that stuff, we won't have room to be able to hear Jesus when he speaks because we'll be too distracted. And so for us to be able to say, what's next for me? You got to be able to hear what Jesus is saying in that direction that he gives you. Just as with these servants at this wedding, you see, when Jesus' mother, when they were there, and all of a sudden she says, hey, listen to Jesus. Right there, they could have said, who? No, I'm not going to listen to that guy. He's got sandals at a wedding. But instead, they listened to what Jesus had to say. When Jesus said, hey, go take those jars, go fill them with water, they did it. Instead of arguing, instead of saying, no, that can't be right. Let me ask you again. Are you sure that's what you want me to do? No. They said, okay, I'm in. I heard you. It's what you said. I'm going to do it. Even though it doesn't make sense. I'm not saying that every time Jesus commands you or says, hey, this is what I want from you or what I want you to do, that it's always going to make sense or be easy. Sometimes it's going to be really, really, really difficult. Sometimes it's not going to make sense. But just like these servants who had every reason to say, no, they asked for wine. You're saying water. That seems wrong. Maybe I misheard you. Let me do the right thing that I think we're supposed to do. Are you willing to listen to Jesus? Are you going to be able to listen to Jesus, or are there too many things in your life that are going to stop you? And this last one, recognize that there's work to do. Recognize that it's not over. That as we want to create a movement, as we want our friends to come to know Jesus, you know what that doesn't mean? Doing nothing. Your friends, your community, your family, your whoever will never understand the impact that Jesus will have on their life and the fact that he loves them and all the things that we've talked about tonight and every other week. They'll never understand if it doesn't mean one of you or one of us or somebody comes alongside them and tells them. If we say, hey, we want a movement of Jesus, we want this world to change, but we do nothing, guess what's going to happen? Nothing. We have to be willing to do the work. We have to be willing to say that I will do the work. If we just sit by and say, oh, well, somebody else is probably going to do it. Hey, that kid that's like really mean to me at school, somebody else will probably tell them about Jesus. I'm not going to because they're probably going to hit me. No, sometimes it means going and talking to that person. It means understanding that the work isn't done and there's so much still to do. Our community, our friends, our family, our coaches, our teammates, whoever, need you. They need an example in their life like you who believes and knows and understands who Jesus is to come alongside them and tell them that there is a God that loves them. Right now I'm going to invite the band back up and we're going to dive into a time of worship. And what I encourage you to do, just like I do every single week, is take this opportunity to do those things. The three things that we've talked about tonight. But take this opportunity to listen to what God is saying to you. Take this opportunity to hear what he has for you. You know, so many times we get stuck in these words and, all right, let me stare at the screen. Maybe it means you closing your eyes instead of worrying about that it says this is living 100 times. Maybe it's more important that you sit there and maybe the room isn't quiet, but you are quiet and still to hear what Jesus has to say. And in that, I want you to understand that Jesus wants to use you. Not that he's settling and saying, okay, like I'll use you. Jesus regularly in his life chose people just like us. People who messed up. People who fall short. People who aren't the best. And that sounds a lot like me. So when we ask ourselves, okay, what's next? I don't want you to say that like, okay, what's next? What do I have to do now? It's not what we have to do now. It's what we get to do now. What is next for me in my walk? What is next for me in helping create a movement in my culture? And as we know, as we've looked back at this year of everything that has been going on and is still going on, there is so much that we can do for this world. There are so many people that need to know the love of Jesus. But what it takes is for us to not stop and say, all right, the work will get done by somebody else. But for us to say, God, I'm willing to do the work and I'm ready to go talk to people. I'm ready to go share the love of Jesus. I'm ready to love you and love others always. As we dive into worship, I want you to reflect on those three things. And don't say, God, what do I have to do next? Say, God, what do you need me for next? Because I'm ready. And let's begin to create a movement and a change in our world and in our culture.